Your blood runs orange and blue. This is the pod for you. You're listening to Orange and Blue Bloods, hosted by EJ Stewart and Tommy Beer. Let's get to it, New York.
To quote Rick Pitino, or something close to Rick Pitino once said, Michael Jordan not walking through that door. Kobe Bryant not walking through that door. Vince Carter not walking through that door. All of the greats who have made All-Star Weekend and made it the spectacle that it was, not walking through that door. If you watched on this weekend past in Salt Lake City, I'm EJ Stewart. This is Orange and Blue Bloods, a New York Knicks podcast, an Audacy original, a WFAN original. I'm EJ, joined by Tommy Beer. We'll be talking about the All-Star Weekend that was, I think is the best way to put it. A game that was really uncompetitive, a game that was, quite frankly, a bore for a lot of people. We'll talk about if the game needs to be fixed, can it be fixed? Plenty of that discussion there. We'll also talk about the Knicks' performances in this game. We'll talk about Julius Randle at the All-Star game on Sunday. We'll also talk about him and Sims participating in the All-Star Saturday night festivities. Randle in the three-point contest, Sims in the dunk contest. We'll give you guys a recap on how they did. And it is another edition of This Week in Knicks History. And this is a very, very important week in Knicks history. It is essentially 12 years since Carmelo Anthony was traded to the New York Knicks, a move that kind of cemented the Knicks' next era of basketball, an era that I think is still debated about and still controversial in regards to that trade and what happened afterwards and how we view the career of Carmelo Anthony in New York Knicks. So considering I'm with my good buddy Tommy Beer, I think that this will be a great conversation, knowing that he knows the history of this team as well as anybody. So this should be an awesome one. Tommy, what's up, man?
What's going on, my guy? Yes, if MJ did walk through that door, or Colby or any of those dudes, I'm sure they would try, which is more than we can say for the guys on Sunday night who gave zero effort in what, quite frankly, was an embarrassment for the league. So, yes, but they did give us something to talk about. And, yeah, man, it's the second half of the NBA season, or actually the final quarter of the NBA season.
Right.
There's 22 games left on the slate. So I think we have about 6 weeks or so of very competitive, interesting games. But first, let's talk a little bit about the weekend that was.
Yeah, we will talk about that. And remember, this is Orange and Blue Bloods, New York Knicks podcast, Audacy original. You can catch these episodes wherever you get your podcast, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you hit the auto download feature on your streaming service so you can get these episodes whenever we drop. We drop 3 times a week, so this is the first one of this week. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube. You can find not only the full episode, but also the segments of this show on our YouTube channel, which is the Audacy Sports channel. So search Audacy Sports, search Orange and Blue Blood. You'll catch our videos there. So not only you got the audio component, you also got the video component with us. So really good stuff here at Audacy and WFAN. And let's have this conversation regarding the All-Star game. So the NBA capped off its All-Star weekend with an All-Star game that is being criticized for its lack of defense and effort. Team Giannis and Team LeBron squared up in Salt Lake City in Utah. Team Giannis won 184-175 in this game. That score already kind of telling you what kind of defense was being played. Jason Tatum scored 55 points in the win. He broke the record for the most points ever scored in an All-Star game. He won the Kobe Bryant Award, which is the new All-Star Game MVP award that was renamed a couple of years ago. Knicks representative, Julius Randle, he represented the Knicks in this one. He did play in this game. He scored 11 points for Team LeBron. And look, there were some different things that went into some of this All-Star game this season, particularly the All-Star game draft, which we've had for the last 4 or 5 seasons. It happened this time right before tip-off. So there were players that were up on the stage, and then Giannis and LeBron were picking their teams right before basically the game was about to be played. They announced the players, they picked the players. There was a national anthem and an "Oh Canada" song, and then they went out there and played. But the game, as I said, was not only criticized by fans, but even the participants and the players that played in this game talked about it not really being what it had to be. Jaylen Brown called it a quote-unquote glorified layup line. Mike Malone said it was, quote, the worst basketball game ever played. He was a coach in this game. He's a coach of the Denver Nuggets. Michael Malone there saying, worst basketball game ever played. So this was, I don't think the kind of showcase the NBA wanted, but it is what they got. So I'll ask Tommy here, because there's been some conversation just on the surface of, should this even matter? Should we have an issue with the fact that it's an All-Star game exhibition? Like, should we ask these guys to play hard? I'm going to ask you just on a basic level, that I think we already know this answer given your earlier comments. Do you have a problem with the lack of defense that was played at the All-Star game on Sunday?
Yeah, definitely. And just, you mentioned the national anthem, and then then they played the game. But as our guy JJ, the producer, mentioned in our chat, there was a Post Malone concert before the game.
That did happen too, yeah.
And another 10 minutes of commercials. And it's one of my pet peeves in the NBA. I think we probably mentioned it on the pod at some point over the past couple months. But the NBA's refusal to, fans don't know when the game is going to start. If it's on TNT, it'll probably start 15 minutes late. If it's an ESPN game, it'll actually start on time. If it's a non-nationally televised game, it'll start around 12 minutes after the scheduled start time. But that's if it's at MSG. If it's in Atlanta, then it's 9 minutes. Like, it shouldn't be that difficult to have if the scheduled tip time is 7:30, start at 7:30. If you're going to start at 7:37, have the tip. The MLB first pitch does that sometimes. NFL game start at 1:00. You know when the game is going to start. The World Cup, the biggest sporting event in the world, if it's going to start at 2:30 p.m. set Mountain Time, that's when you know the game is going to start. So it's just it is a major pet peeve of mine that the NBA still hasn't figured this out. I know it frustrates fans. It's not a big deal, but it's something, I guess the benefit is maybe they can sneak in an extra couple commercials. But I just think it's a short-term fix for a bigger issue. Just get that sorted out. Adam Silver, you've been ahead of the game on a lot of things, and you've improved the sport and improved the league in a lot of ways. That's something I hope that you continue to do in the future. That out of the way. As it turns out, the Post Malone concert was probably, he moved around more than most of the players, defensively. At least he moved around on stage and gave an effort. Made it. Shook hands with the folks in the crowd. That's the All-Star game. And again, you're a bigger All-Star game guy than I am. I never get too excited or too worked up about the All-Star teams or the guys nominated or the guys that represented him. The fact that Jalen, basically to my point, Jalen Brunson not being at that All-Star game is a joke. I think Knicks fans, the silver lining is he got a couple of days off to rest, and I think he's going to carry that chip on his shoulder for the following 6 weeks, as well he should, because he certainly earned the opportunity to be a representative All-Star that first season. As far as the game is concerned, yes. And it's always been a joke. There's been very limited defense, but we saw with the Elam ending the last couple of years, there's competitiveness in the fourth quarter that went out. That went by the wayside this year. And it's just a glorified layup line. But somebody texted me. It's like a combination of like a dunk contest and a 3-point shootout in the same game. But my point is but it was, if that would be true, if the guys didn't care if they won the dunk contest or didn't care if they won the 3-point shootout. Every once in a while in games past, you'd have a guy shoot from half court, or a guy gets hot, hits 3 threes in a row, then the crowd starts getting amped up, let him shoot 4 or 5, or there's a one-on-one. But yeah, just from start to finish, I think we kind of stuck with it, hoping that they would eventually ratchet up the intensity. Even and again, nobody wants them to play 100%. Nobody's asking to put forth playoff intensity, but just at least try to stay in front of a guy and do some along those lines. So yeah, the game was boring. I thought this was a chance. The first Sunday without football and since September 1st or whatever, an opportunity for the league to kind of showcase their stars, and they did anything but. And I thought it was a laughable kind of a disrespect to the fans, just how little did the players cared about that performance.
Yeah, I'm glad you kind of harping on the players, because look, I am rarely the guy who is the old man who yells at the cloud. I'm rarely the guy, and I think people and you who've been on the show and listened to this podcast enough know that I'm not this generation of player can't do. I defend this generation player a lot. I defend this current day NBA a lot. That being said, I think that what happened on Sunday was a disgrace. Let's just be honest. I mean, we talk about All-Star games in the past, and you're right. We're not saying that we want guys playing 100%. But I'm so glad apparently there are other All-Star game fundamentalists out there that aren't just me, because people are posting clips from 1993.
Yeah.
People posting clips from 2001. People
Yep.
posting clips from 1998. And you watch those games. There were fouls that I saw in the 1993, the last time the game was in Utah. There are fouls in that game that would have been called flagrant fouls in an NBA regular season game this year. Like, I'm not like, these guys were actually playing a real game. They were playing defense, playing hard. Of course, they're not going out there clubbing people, and they're not going out there trying to hurt anybody. But this generation of player annoyed me this weekend so much because, you know, between Kevin Durant talking about, well, you know, the fact that I did a trade request that that helps the league. It actually builds the excitement. And a lot of the stuff we do hear from these guys, and the adoration that they clamor for, that they say that the other players in the past got that they didn't get. Well, those other players who make way less money, who had way less preparation in terms of how they got to prepare their bodies, the medical advancements from then to now, like without all that stuff, those guys gave us competent All-Star games that we could at least watch and enjoy. And these players today want that same adoration and don't want to do any of that work. They don't want to do the dunk contest. They don't want to just stay in front of a man in an All-Star game because, oh, well, I might get hurt. It's like, guys, like, are you guys that soft? Are you guys that soft? I'm not talking about, again, go out there and do something stupid and risk your life. But you're playing a basketball game. I mean, if really just staying in front of a man playing defense is that much to ask, and that is that big a risk that you could get hurt, then why are we playing an All-Star game? Like, I watched that game on Sunday and thought, this is the beginning of the end of this game, because you can't put that product out year in and year out. Like, I don't know if you saw, Tommy, but in the first quarter, they had, or maybe in the early second quarter, I think, at some point, Adam Silver is sitting right next to a man that many people won't be familiar with. I am extremely familiar with him because I host the New Generation Hero Talk podcast where we talk about superheroes every week. He was sitting next to David Zaslav, who is the head of Warner Brothers CEO, Warner Brothers Discovery. He's the CEO. He is essentially the man that's going to be negotiating the next NBA contract for the next TV deal. TNT has those rights. We'll have to see whether or not they pick them up until after 2025. I know him well because he's also the head of DC Films, or at least he had to hire James Gunn and all those guys who now lead DC Films. And if you love superhero movies, you're very familiar with what David Zaslav has done. If you saw his face sitting next to Adam Silver, that was not a pleasant conversation. He looked like, this is what I'm paying for? And Adam Silver looked like he's trying to defend it. Like, yo, man, I know this is bad. We're going to try to figure it. Like, he didn't look like a happy man. That's a guy who was cutting major budget motion picture movies for the sake of a tax break. You think that he's going to give the NBA tens of billions of dollars for guys who won't play in TNT national TV games on a regular season, and then for the All-Star game are going to put on that performance? I'm telling you, this is a lot bigger of a deal than I think people make it. And I think these players understand, because at the end of the day, these guys are getting so much money, and the game is so comfortable for them right now that they kind of think that these things that have been established as core elements of the sport kind of just are what they are. They're too big to fail, and it won't actually affect them. Trust me. It'll be very interesting to see what this next TV deal looks like. Everybody assumes, oh, they're going to get way more money. They'll probably get more money just based off of inflation. But I really worry about just kind of continuingly how much more you'll see these companies just throw out a bunch of money at these leagues and say, all right, it doesn't matter what crap you give us, we'll put it out there because we'll get enough bread. There are eyeballs who watch that, and people who watch that, and they turned off. I know I didn't because I didn't have to do a show on WFAN. I had to talk about this crap for 3 hours. But there are a lot of people who watched that and said, this is ridiculous. Why am I still watching this? And it's annoying because, again, it's like, you guys want the same money. You guys want the same adoration. You guys want the same love. But then those guys played in all-star games, gave us effort. Those guys did dunk contests. That they did things to help establish parts of the NBA that have now become near and dear to the same people that you want their adoration from. And you're not going to get it with this kind of nonsense. So I couldn't believe how bad that was. And I thought, okay, maybe the first 3 quarters will be awful. And like it was, and it was honestly, it was even worse than it's been in past years, which is saying a lot. But then to get to that fourth quarter and to still see essentially no effort was unbelievable. Like, I know Mike Malone credited Embiid and Kyrie Irving as two guys that were trying to, and I agreed with them. I thought both of those guys were kind of like clearly playing like this is a game. Like, hey, maybe somebody will start playing if we start doing something, and it just didn't work. And then you got Jaylen Brown, who's in the game, saying it was a glorified layup line. I'm like, Jaylen Brown, why didn't you do something about it? You were in the game. Like, you were the one that was saying, all right, everybody clear out and stand on the sideline so me and Jaylen Brown can have a one-on-one game for 3 possessions. Like, you were in that game. How come you didn't make any change? I don't know. I think that this was really bad, and I think it's sad because, again, I think that this was the beginning of the end of the NBA All-Star Game being a thing. I think if you told me 10 years from now that this is just an All-Star Saturday night and this game doesn't exist, I wouldn't be surprised.
Okay, let me agree with you first, and then I'll push back on 2 things. First, in the agreement, the effort level. Again, we're not asking for playoff level intensity. If you can practice, I'll tell you one thing: if Julius Randle or any of the Knicks practice with the same level of effort that they did, that the players in that game played Sunday night, they wouldn't play in the next. They just wouldn't happen. Any good coach worth his salt is not going to let guys step on their court and attempt to get better and practice, get ready for an opponent, even if it's just the basic, run through stuff. Even at a light jog, it's still more intensity. The pickup games that these guys play in the summer at any of the big gyms in Manhattan, out in LA, there's far more intensity. Again, guys aren't D'ing up and slapping the floor and playing crazy defense, but they're trying to stop the other guy from scoring, and then maybe work on a few moves and in and outs, be a little more creative, a little bit more flashy than they might be in a regular season game. So that's the type of thing, and that's what we had seen in years past, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago. These guys competed. Let me push back against 2 things in terms of the All-Star game and how boring the All-Star game was impacting future national TV rights sales. The NFL Pro Bowl, the NFL All-Star game, Pro Bowl game has been so bad for so long that they essentially did do away with it. I don't even know what they had. Flag football.
It's a flag football game this year,
and nobody's ever watched it. Nobody, and the NFL is still, throughout that time, up until today, what the 19 most watched live broadcasts, the top 100, like 97 of them are NFL games. So I guess, I'm sure Silver would mention that. And I'm sure he's probably telling Zaslav, listen, look at our social media engagement levels and TikTok and Twitter, and the NBA has more than that. And live broadcasts in the streaming world continue to maintain value. So I'm not sure how much it'll impact the negotiations, but it's, I'll just mention that. And the other thing I would push back against from a player's perspective, and a couple other people have brought this up, and this is what I was thinking on Sunday night. And I don't disagree with you that the game might go away. I was thinking put Jose Alvarado in the game, or put some G Leaguers in there that
right.
Because it would be more a competitive game is better than a non, good players playing competitively is better than great players not competing. When I was waiting to play 3-on-3 at LA Fitness yesterday, I'd rather watch those guys play than what we saw Sunday night. But as far as the players, in defense of the players, and like you, I'm not this generation. I wish it was, they played hard and they, because the people that say that today's players don't play defense or that they don't compete and all those other things, I think it's a trash take. It's a lazy take. And others have made that point, and we've talked about it in the past. But I think the way I would defend the players too is so much of social media content in general is we've become such a rings culture to the point. I think a lot of it has to do with the defense of those folks that say, Michael Jordan being 6-0 in the finals against LeBron, just getting to the finals. Somehow we've equated that with the only thing that matters is postseason success, and not even postseason success. You have to win the finals. Just getting there is not enough because people knock LeBron for getting to 10 finals, which is ludicrous to me. The implication being he would be looked favorably more favorably if he had lost in the first round as opposed to get the NBA Finals. And so in other words, taking the 2007 Cavs with Zydrunas Ilgauskas and Drew Gooden all the way to the finals and then getting dominated by the Spurs is a knock on LeBron's legacy as
Right.
opposed to a notch in his belt. But for whatever reason, we've arrived at the point where the only thing that matters is how well you play over a 7-game final series or for a 6-week stretch between the Eastern Conference Finals and the NBA Finals. We've devalued the regular season to such a point that why are we surprised that players aren't motivated to play 82 games when they're told over and over and over and over and over again that it doesn't matter? If the regular season doesn't matter, we know the All-Star game doesn't matter. So I think it can be argued from a player perspective. If you gave them truth serum, subconsciously it leaks into how they prepare for each game each day. They understand that they're going to be regarded legacy wise by how they perform over the 6 weeks in April. So how they perform from October through through March, it essentially doesn't matter. And this is a byproduct. Sunday night, I think, was a byproduct of that mentality that's crept in.
And I've heard other people say that, and I don't think that it's a terrible take. But here's my pushback to that. Michael Jordan jumping from the free throw line in 1998 in Seattle earlier, I think in 87, like that increased his legacy. Kobe Bryant winning the dunk contest, Kobe Bryant going to starting in his first All-Star game in 1998 against MJ, that increased their legacy. Hell, Charles Barkley has the cushy position he's got. He's got no rings. He's sitting right there, and he's got no rings. He did not have this idea that he can sit on and say, "Well, I have 3 or 4 championships," and he's one of the, if not the most highest paid sports commentator in all of America. Like, there's too many examples, and those guys obviously all played in All-Star games and had their moments in these games. Magic Johnson, one of the greatest things about his legacy is coming back from HIV, playing in an All-Star game, hitting 7 or 8 threes in the fourth quarter. Like, these guys, yes, the championships mattered, but there are other things about their legacies that also mattered, and some of that stuff involved All-Star weekend. So, yes, we do harping a lot on the rings, but I think it's disingenuous to think that there isn't anything else about some of these guys' careers that actually it made them legends, that made them iconic. Like, Jordan being a slam dunk champion made him iconic, just as not just as much, but it added to the legacy with those championships. Kobe Bryant being a slam dunk champion, being the youngest All-Star game player ever, to have the most All-Star game MVPs to the point where they named the award after him. That adds to his legacy. Again, these guys think that stuff they don't think that matters, but then when they get in these conversations of GOAT conversations, greatest player ever, they say, well, why I'm not in the same conversation? And yes, people may start with the rings, but it's that other stuff too. Like, that other stuff that those guys did that kind of helped move the game forward was important. And these guys don't take that. They take that for granted. Is it the fans' fault that maybe our conversation hedges too much on rings? I mean, maybe, but I just think that if these guys had any sense, you would see. And I think anybody who understands this game looks at this and says, wow, like, I don't know how many clips you see of Michael Jordan jumping from the free throw line. I don't know how many times I've seen Magic Johnson hitting those threes in 1990, 91, 92. Like these are important moments to the league. And I just, we have rings culture, but I think these guys know better than that.
If Trey Murphy did the dunks, copy the dunks that Jordan did, do you think he'd get a 50, and do you think it would be recognized or celebrated the same way? You know what I'm saying? I just think it's kind of, it's been there, done that. It's just, us as a consumer base have seen something. So they got to go above and beyond and do something crazy. Even Tatum at 55 points on Sunday night. Nobody's going to remember that favorably because it was in a meaningless scrimmage, So I understand your take. It certainly would mean more if it was in a competitive game. And you're right. Isaiah, Magic hitting those threes over Isaiah Thomas is a great moment. But I guess people just weigh the pros and cons, and players do that. So it makes for interesting debate. That's for sure.
Yeah, I mean, Dr. J, in the first dunk contest, going back in his last dunk contest, I mean, this weekend means a lot more to the league than I think a lot of people understand. And it's meant so much to a lot of these players' individual legacies than maybe people realize. And, yes, conversation is hedged, is has been a lot on rings, but I think that is Michael Jordan the exact same guy if he doesn't do any dunk contests, if he doesn't do anything in All-Star weekend? I don't know. Like, I don't know if he's this athlete that is just this iconic, like Mike, the sneakers, all that stuff. Like that was as important to his image as it was being the best player in the NBA.
I don't disagree with, and it's a part of it is because there's no TikTok, there's no Twitter, there's no place to consume 10-minute highlights,
right?
Because we weren't on a phone, whereas 10-second highlights. But to your point, I don't think Jordan sells as many shoes. I don't think the Air Jordan brand becomes as iconic if it's not for the dunk contest and stuff like that.
Yeah, and then again, I think about Magic and thinking about like HIV awareness and him going out there in those games, like how much good did he do playing in a game like that and playing the way he did, and how much people learned that weekend. Like these things matter. Like and it's unfortunate that again, these are players essentially my generation. I'm 31 years old. Like, and our generation gets crapped on about feeling like we should be able to do less work and get the same amount of treatment, the same amount of love, and the same amount of money that other previous generations did. And I always fight back on that. But with this situation, with these players in the NBA, I feel like it's very like relevant. It's to me, it's very relevant.
One last point before we move on to Saturday night, just Sunday night. And the weekend as a whole, the NBA deserves to be knocked for was having Karl Malone in the building, and basically celebrating his presence. That is a disgusting job by the NBA. Should be ashamed of the way they handled that. To basically someone who the backstory, Karl Malone impregnated a 13-year-old girl. During his college days, basically detached himself from his children. He's been a deadbeat dad for most of his life. So for the NBA to not only, I understand it was in Utah, and then you have the insane conspiracy theories that John Stockton has espoused. Which is in and of itself, but for Malone to judge the dunk contest Saturday night and then to be on a stage with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and LeBron on Sunday when they were celebrating LeBron's passing passing Kareem as the all-time leading scorer. Terrible job by the NBA. They got to know better. I was offended by his presence there.
Yeah, I mean, maybe they were catering to just that audience, that was there, but I don't know anybody who watched that who understands Karl Malone's backstory wanted to see him there. I don't understand it, and it was very weird how they nobody really. I know someone during the weekend did a Q&A where they at least asked him about it. He finally had to at least deny or say I don't want to talk about that stuff.
Right.
But like to even just like go around like as if that there's nothing weird about this guy was crazy, and he was like the unofficial MC of All-Star Weekend. It was bad. So it was not good.
And nobody would have said anything if he wasn't there. It wasn't like it was a major story going into it.
Or if somebody says something, the first thing that happens is the next, if you tweet something, where's Karl Malone? The next comment under that tweet is, here's all you need to know about Karl Malone, and everybody gets
Period. And if we're going to suspend Kyrie, and we're the last people to defend Kyrie, but if you're going to suspend Kyrie for 5 games or so, you have to also call into account, Kareem's body work there, and it's quite frankly offensive.
Yeah, I didn't like that, and I didn't like that they put Kareem and LeBron in that situation to have to, dap up Karl Malone and take the picture. Like it just that was bad. So Sunday night, not very fun. We did have All-Star Weekend, which had its moments. First of all, shout out to Quentin Grimes, who played on Friday in the Rising Stars challenge. He played really well in those games, by the way. He I think if they would have won that last game, he won MVP. He really caught fire, and I think if you're a Knicks fan, maybe you hope he can take some of that hot shooting into this last quarter of the season. But the Knicks did come home empty-handed. They did not win, obviously, in the Rising Star Challenge with Quentin Grimes. He didn't win the MVP of that. And then on Saturday night, you had Julius Randle finishing 7th out of 8 in the three-point contest, much to the chagrin of Kaiden Randle, his young son, who was seen on camera crying as his dad was missing the final shots in that competition. And then you had Jericho Sims, who finished 3rd in the dunk contest. Neither player for the Knicks qualified to enter the final round of those competitions. So not much from the Knicks this weekend outside of Quentin Grimes' impressive performances on Friday. Dame Lillard won 3-point contest, which is a long time coming for him. He's been in that thing for like years, and he usually does poorly. So I guess finally he got one. So congrats to Dame Lillard. And Mac McClung, who was not in the NBA when he was announced to enter into this dunk contest. He was in the G League, now on a two-way deal with the Philadelphia 76ers. He won the dunk contest. So let's start with the dunk contest and Sims in particular, because of course this is the Knicks podcast. What did you think of Sims' performance? Because there was a lot of fans that were hopeful that maybe he can get this considering his great athleticism.
Yeah. First, I thought I found the dunk contest very entertaining. I enjoyed the 3-point contest.
I did too.
Even Friday night game, I thought was pretty cool. I liked they actually played with intensity. We saw the G League guys. We saw Grimes, who not only scored a bunch of points, did so efficiently, and put the clamps on Scoot Henderson.
Yes,
when
he did.
So there was a that those games I liked. Maybe we talked about what could save the All-Star game. Maybe that format where there's break them up into 4 teams and have them play to set game to 40. I think all that stuff will be explored, but I think that makes sense to start with that as a potential starting point, because it seemed to work well for the Friday nights, the games on Friday night. The rookie, sophomores, and G League guys. As far as Sims goes on Saturday night, I think the things that kind of hurt him were the things that we suspected might going into the weekend.
Right.
It just there's a showmanship involved in all this, and I think the people around him, the idea when he clipped the paper to the net made a lot of sense in theory, but it's the way you present, it's the way you get the crowd excited before you dunk, it's your mannerisms, it's your excitement, it's your there's people who are good players, and then there are people who are great dunkers. And Mac McClung is a great dunker. Anybody who's had the internet for the past 5 years knows this. Since he was a junior in high school, sophomore in high school, he's been throwing down incredible dunks. So nobody was surprised that I think people were surprised at how well he dunked. Or some people may not have been as familiar with who he is and what that kid can do. But yeah, I thought Trey Murphy had some amazing dunks.
He did.
Some really good dunks. Kenny Martin, wasn't great. But as far as Sims goes, I thought like in a different you just look at the stills, the pictures of his 2 arms, in the honey pot, was impressive. But again, he's just not a guy. If you don't practice those dunks on a consistent basis, and Mac McClung over the past few days had figured out fine-tuned his routine, but he had been doing those dunks for years and years and years and years, and every time he goes into a gym, somebody asks him to do something along those lines, whereas Sims has never, it's basically just been stand underneath the rim, grab rebounds, and we throw an alley-oop, you'll get some cool dunks.
Right.
But that's basically what we saw from Sims. I don't think it was shocking.
Yeah, I think that the Sims performance was unfortunately a little predictable.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can judge book by his cover, and Sims, quiet, reserved guy, guy who's a great athlete, but for an NBA dunk contest, maybe not best suited because of the showmanship aspect that needs to be in there, the creativity that needs to be in there. Right. First dunk, 2 arms in the rim. I think a good idea. I think a good first dunk. He didn't nail it because he didn't put both in immediately, so I kind of hurt him there. But you think, okay, you did that dunk, now you gotta go to something different, and then he kind of go into a similar dunk, or almost the exact same dunk, on the second one where he puts his arm in the rim and then pulls out the 50 score in the envelope. Which I was a little confused by that dunk, because I thought that when he did it, I was like, okay, maybe he's gonna put his arm in the rim and pull it from underneath the net, which actually would have been pretty impressive. But then he just grabbed it with the other hand, so I was just like, what was the point of the envelope? So. It seemed a little half-baked there, not necessarily the most creativity, and he didn't have a lot of energy involved. So good dunks, decent dunks. He didn't embarrass himself by any means, but not enough. And Mac McClung, can't say enough about how awesome he was, and I'm glad the NBA put him in the dunk contest. Yes. I know that Kevin Durant on the Cetera's podcast was like, what are we doing putting Mac McClung in the dunk contest? And to Kevin Durant's credit, he is trying to say, hey, we need to get stars in there, and I agree with that. But if they didn't put Mac McClung in that contest, that would have been another probably mediocre dunk contest. Like Trey Murphy did really well, but it wouldn't have been the second guy who would have been able to really compete with him probably. So we would have been disappointed again. So I'm really happy that the NBA said, all right, fine. If we can't get NBA players to do it, let's just find the best dunker who's NBA affiliated or close to it that we can put in. And people forget, it's not the first time they did this, because people keep saying it's the first time, because Derrick Jones who is in the NBA a bunch of times now. He was almost essentially a G League player when he entered the dunk contest the first time around. He's been on the Suns, he's been on the Heat, he's played on a bunch of teams. Like he played like only like 3 or 4 games in the NBA, but he is known as a dunker. Anybody who watched Derrick Jones clips knows that he's kind of like a Mac McClung. Like, there are a lot of these high school kids who kind of got on just because they're incredible dunkers, and you can go on YouTube and watch their high school mixtapes. So they put him in there too. That didn't work out quite as well the first time. He actually ended up winning it in later years. So the NBA has done this before, where they get a guy who's like very much a fringe NBA player who gets in. But McClung was great, and the question becomes, did he actually save the dunk contest? Like, it's tough because I think he'll be great next year when he does it again, because I'm sure he'll do it again, and the NBA will beg some team to sign him to a two-way so that they can make sure. That's definitely what happened. They definitely called all 30 NBA teams and said, hey, we got to get this guy a two-way deal so he's not out there in the G League uniform in this competition. So the Sixers did the bid. So congrats to the Sixers. Now you have the first Sixer that won a slam dunk contest. People forget Dr. J didn't win a slam dunk contest as a Sixer. He lost to Larry Nance in the first NBA one, and in the ABA one, of course, when he won, that was with the New York Nets at that time. So Philly has a dunk contest guy. Congrats to Mac McClung. Do you think we'll ever get stars back into this slam dunk contest?
I don't think so. I don't think there's a motivation. It's a motivation factor, especially with the onset of social media. John Morant doesn't need to do dunks in the dunk contest for people to know that he can fly. He does them in games, and then we watch him on social media that night and the next morning and all the shows. So I don't think I don't know if it'll benefit him to the point. It's kind of a pros and cons thing. It would raise his profile to a certain degree. We saw Tatum win the All-Star MVP with his new shoes on. That was kind of a cool subplot. But again, for a guy like John Morant, if he doesn't win the dunk contest, then then that's the story. Like, you claim you're this great dunker. I'm sure that's factored into LeBron and other guys. It's basically a lose-lose situation. If you win, it's because of course you have to win. You have no choice.
Right.
And if you lose, then you let somebody named Trey Murphy beat you, or Mac McClung, who people hadn't heard of. So I just don't know. There will be stars. I'm sure we'll get a couple guys spliced in. We've seen in the past. Blake Griffin was an all-star. Zach LaVine,
Howard,
yeah. You've seen some guys that maybe not top 5, top 3 players in the NBA, but up in that top 15, top 20 class, all NBA caliber players. So I think you'll get those guys here and there, going forward.
Yeah, I am hopeful that we will get it. To me, I feel like it only takes one. Like, I think once we get the one guy to do it, and I think somebody's gonna decide, I'm gonna do this because for whatever reason. I think that you'll start to then trickle down and get some guys. Like, it feels like the last 4 or 5 years, like, like you said before, like, we've gotten pretty good players in dunk contests in the past. It feels like the last 4 or 5 years, they've really been just like purely guys or bench players or guys who are fringe rotation guys. I think that there's a chance we can get back to getting some stars, or at least starting players. Like, when I grew up, like Jason Richardson won dunk contests. Like, he was a good player. Like, this is a guy who was a starting player who won a national championship in college. Like, there was a time where, like, okay, maybe it wasn't the superstars, but they were guys who you knew. Like, you knew everybody who was in the dunk contest. Andre Iguodala, Nate Robinson. Like, these are guys that we were familiar with. May not have been superstars, but at least they were familiar guys. It was unfortunate with what happened on Saturday was, while all those guys are great athletes, none of those guys are guys who are consistent rotation guys, except for Trey Murphy, who does play consistently for the Rocket, or for the Pelicans. But a lot of guys that people didn't know. So if we even get to those days where we can get starting caliber players in the dunk contest, that'd be great. But I think that there's a chance we'll get stars at some point. We're in a bad stretch right now, but I'm happy that Mac did what he did, because there are some people saying you need to kill a dunk contest, and I don't think that's going to happen now. Like, he showed that there's still a reason to watch, that there's a reason to pay attention, and that new dunks can be done. Like, every dunk that he did had some kind of unique variation that we had not seen before. And he said before dunk contest that I have dunks that nobody's seen. So I think that these guys got to get creative. And I think also credit to the fans as well. I think, not that Mac wasn't great, but I think they really did appreciate his creativity. Like, They weren't saying, "Oh, like jump over a car or light yourself on fire and do something like." He didn't have to pull out crazy gimmicks for people to like appreciate. Oh wow, what he did was actually incredible.
Yep.
So credit to everybody kind of understanding that, and Trey Murphy too. Well,
Yeah.
like besides the Alvarado dunk, didn't really involve anything. It was just his athleticism, which is, as we learned, elite. I didn't realize he can get up like that.
Same.
Yeah. So great performance by him. It was awesome to see the dunk contest. And unfortunately, Julius didn't do well in 3-point contest. I don't think anybody was too surprised by that. But again, shout out to young QG Quentin Grimes for doing his thing on the Rising Stars competition. So as we move forward from All-Star Weekend, let's take a look back as we do another edition of This Week in Knicks History. And this is a powder keg potentially for some Knicks fans when they talk about this. It was on this day, February 21st. We're recording this podcast on a Tuesday, that the Knicks traded for Carmelo Anthony. New York acquired Carmelo along with Chauncey Billups, Ronaldo Bachman, Anthony Carter, and Sheldon Williams in the trade. It eventually became a 3-team trade that involved some other players that kind of didn't really matter. But he was part of a 3-team trade that involved the Knicks and the Nuggets. The Knicks sent away Wilson Chandler, Danilo Gallinari, Raymond Felton, Timofey Mozgov, a 2014 first-round pick, 2 second-round pick swaps, and a 2 second-round picks and a 2016 first-round pick swap to the Nuggets. And that was the trade between those two teams. The Knicks also sent Eddie Curry and Anthony Randolph to the Minnesota Timberwolves in this deal. So Carmelo comes to the Knicks. A lot of hoopla, hope that the Knicks will maybe get back to championship contention. He doesn't need to lead the Knicks to 3 straight playoff appearances in those first 3 years in New York, but they have just one series win. He finishes as the Knicks' 7th all-time leading scorer. So some success there, but also some lean years. The Knicks spent several years in the lottery in the last several years in New York. Meanwhile, for the Nuggets, they also did not make the playoffs in those 3 years after trading Carmelo Anthony between 2011 and 2013. They made it past the first round. And that was it. They got the first round, and that was it. They never made it past the second round. And then they began a 5-year playoff drought. They would then return to the playoffs in 2019 and make it to the second round of the playoffs for the first time in years, where they were led by point guard Jamal Murray, who was drafted with the 2016 first-round pick that was swapped with the New York Knicks. So with all that being said, if you can follow all that, it was a very complicated trade. Tommy, as we sit here in 2023, 12 years later, were the Knicks right to make the Carmelo Anthony trade?
Man, you talk about something that's been discussed over and over and over again by every Knicks fan from 10 ways from here to Sunday. At the time, I thought it was the right trade. In retrospect, I still think it's the right move. It's one of those, some trades are win-win. Some trades are lopsided for both teams. This is probably, as close to a draw as you're going to get. The Nuggets, have Murray to show for it, but didn't have much postseason success. With the Knicks in his final 4 years, I think it's, the Knicks did not qualify for the playoffs. They kind of rushed into signing Melo to a contract extension that wasn't a wise financial decision. But again, for his first 3 years in New York, people forget just how bad the Knicks were prior to Carmelo's arrival. I think, and the people that knocked the trade in retrospect, like they gave up too much. Listen, was Timofey Mozgov and Wilson Chandler and Danilo Gallinari going to lead you to the finals? No. Those guys had respectable careers, but it wasn't like they gave up on a young Isaiah Thomas or some other star.
Giannis, yeah.
So it's the Knicks, that 2013, that 12-13 season, the best season, in recent franchise history. Fortunately, the Knicks are back kind of on the upswing. We obviously had the Julius Randle All NBA, year in the playoff series against the Hawks. Now they're trending towards making the playoffs again with Jalen Brunson and Randle and a good solid young core there. So there's a lot to like, but there was very lean years from the time Marbury left town up until Carmelo Anthony arrived. Then there were a lot of lean years following that. So I think you have to give Carmelo a lot of credit for making the Knicks relevant, at least for a little while. That's something that he earned, that he deserved. There wasn't a lot of bright spots for the Knicks during that stretch, and he provided something for the fans to get excited about.
Okay, so was it the right trade from my position? Yes, but I'll use this with a major caveat or kind of asterisk. It was the right trade because Melo forced them to make the trade. So if people remember what happened during that time, it was very clear that he wanted out of Denver. He did it very respectfully, by the way. But it was clear he wanted out. And essentially the Nuggets decided, okay, because we don't have much leverage, because Carmelo's gonna have his contract coming up, we kind of have to send him probably wherever he wants to go so he can sign an extension to that team. So Melo wanted the Knicks, but he wanted New York. So what he did was he essentially flirted with the Nets as well. And the Nets at that is actually kind of ironic. It feels like it was almost deja vu of what happened with Kyrie and KD, because the Nets were looked at as a team who like weren't that good, but like had like nice pieces. Like Brook Lopez at that time, people thought was going to be a young all-star, and they had a package that definitely could get a guy like Carmelo Anthony. So Carmelo, instead of saying, look, I'm only going to sign an extension with the Knicks, you need to trade me, essentially said, I'm willing to go to either team. And that kind of forced, at that time, President Donnie Walsh's hand, and Dolan got into the mix and said, you got to make this trade to say, okay, we cannot afford Carmelo Anthony to go to the Nets, at that time, the New Jersey Nets, who were going to move to Brooklyn in a year or two. We can't afford him to go there and sign an extension, and then we had a chance at Melo and we blew it. We can't have that happen. So Melo, the Knicks had to make that trade, and they had to gut their roster essentially. The Knicks in that point in the season, they kind of were like the Knicks are this season. They had like one star in Amari Stoudemire and a bunch of young players that were ascending, guys who looked like they had a future. They were playing good team basketball. They had a good thing going. And that was a super team era where players were taking less money in order to come together and win championships. You saw that obviously with the Miami Heat. Melo, out of all those guys, was the only guy who was like, no, I need to get all the money I possibly can get. I need to sign this extension before this lockout happens, and I will sign it with the Nets if that means I get New York City. And it forced the Knicks' hand. And what happened is he kind of cut his nose despite his face. Like he demanded that he got that trade, and he demanded that he got that money up front. And then the Knicks didn't have the resources to build the team around him. So when people say, well, why couldn't the Knicks build around him? Well, it's Carmelo Anthony's fault. If he would have just either told them, I'm only signing with the Knicks, so trade me to the Knicks, and therefore they could have took assets off the table to make that deal happen, or the Nuggets risk losing him for nothing, or just said, don't trade me anywhere. I'll play the season out and I'll sign in free agency, because the Knicks had cap space as well. People forget. The Knicks then could have used those other assets to then get another third star. Maybe they just maneuver the roster differently so that they had other pieces. Like this Melo era, I think could have gone extremely differently had he just made one decision that would have required him to just not take as much money, and he didn't do that.
What's amazing is like it nowadays, looking back, it doesn't seem like crazy that an all-star got traded. Back at that point, seemed like it was talked about for months ahead of time, and we're still discussing it. And just this past trade deadline, we had 3 8-time all-stars, Durant, Kyrie, and Russell Westbrook traded within like 12 hours, and it was like, business as usual almost, But at that point, it just wasn't that, he was kind of a precursor. He was before it was a fashionable thing to do. That's why it was so controversial, because it's something that we didn't have a lot of, to weigh, should a team give up all these assets for this one player, and what makes, it is. And to your point, had Melo, and even in terms of locking money before the lockout, getting a guaranteed contract, he instead of giving himself a player option for that season in which he was traded, if he had given himself, instead of giving himself the player option, he wanted the guaranteed money.
Yeah, exactly.
If he had just not done that, then he would have been a free agent the summer prior, and it would have been, instead of Bosh as the third banana with Wade, and LeBron, it would have been Melo most likely. Who knows where they would have landed?
Yeah.
But all four of those guys, including Bosh, would have been free agents. Obviously, they were all drafted for the first 5 picks with Darko. That same summer, they all would have been free agents. And Melo, his career would look so different if he wins, because he would have been alongside LeBron. That means he would have won a championship. And you talk about great players and legacy, and obviously Carmelo's careers looked at far differently if he has a title with LeBron.
Yeah, and I think that there's also a chance that if he goes into that free agency, maybe the Knicks end up signing Melo and Amari in that offseason.
We saw Kyrie bring KD to Brooklyn. KD
Right.
wasn't going to Brooklyn if it wasn't for Kyrie. So
yeah, and then maybe this becomes this mega super wars that happens in that summer of 2010 that was so anticipated. So a lot of things could have changed with Melo. You're right. The first contract extension he got, he didn't get the 3+1 deal. He wanted the full 5-year deal.
Yes.
Like there were a lot of things that 4+1 and the 5. It was a lot of things that happened with Melo. All of it came down to Melo wanting his money, which is understandable. We're in a capitalist society, so I understand it. But I'm just saying, for Melo's basketball legacy,
yes,
and for what his Knicks legacy could have been, as a guy who grew up a Carmelo Anthony fan, who's my favorite athlete as a kid, like I just think like if he would have just told them I'm only going to the Knicks, or just told them I'm going to free agency, I think we're having an entirely different conversation about the Knicks franchise. I think they absolutely compete for championships. I think they go to more than just one series past the first round. I don't know if they win a title, but Melo was that good at that time. He was that good that he could have been the best player on the championship team, and it just didn't happen. And partially, I think, because of him. Last question before we get out of here, because it's a question that gets asked a lot with Melo and his legacy. Do you think his number should be retired at MSG?
Certainly worth the debate. First and foremost, Carmelo Anthony is a first ballot Hall of Famer. No ifs, ands, or buts about it.
Absolutely.
Remember, it's not the NBA Hall of Fame. Even if it was the NBA Hall of Fame, he'd still be a Hall of Famer. But it's the Basketball Hall of Fame. Championship as a freshman at Syracuse, multiple Olympic gold medals, a fantastic scorer, leading scorer on those Olympic teams. And then you factor in his incredible production, especially on the offensive end, as a professional. Carmelo's one of just 5 players in NBA history to average 20+ points per game in each of his first 14 seasons. The other 4 players in that club: Kareem, Shaq, Michael Jordan, LeBron James. Carmelo wasn't a great scorer. He was one of the greatest scorers in the history of the sport. And to suggest otherwise is just not accurate.
Right.
Should his number get retired? I think it kind of comes down where you fall on the number retiring debate. It's weird, but Carmelo actually played more games as a Nugget than he did as a Knick. His greatest team success was with the Nuggets by far. Denver qualified for the postseason each of the 7 seasons Carmelo was in New York. We know about that run to the Western Conference Finals. All that being said, Carmelo's probably one of the 10 greatest players to ever wear a Knicks uniform, so I don't have a problem with him being retired. I'm probably a little bit of a stickler, or a hard grader, as Mike and the Mad Dog would say, when it comes to retiring numbers.
Yeah.
I probably want a little more postseason success. I'd probably be a little more selective, make it a little bit harder club to get into. But I'd have no problem with the Knicks retiring Melo's number.
Yeah, I mean, the Knicks have had a pretty selective class right now. I mean, you're talking about Walt Frazier, Dick Barnett, Earl Monroe, Dick McGuire, Willis Reed, DeBusschere, Bill Bradley, and Ewing. And Red Holtzman, who doesn't have a number, but they retired. They announced the 613 wins.
But so many of those are skewed by I shouldn't say skewed, but it's because of those 2 titles. That's why there's
right. I was going to say, and what I was going to say was that, like, besides Ewing and McGuire, all those guys have championships, and they all kind of played on the same teams.
Yeah.
So besides that era of Knicks basketball, really no one else has that jersey retired. I have been I'm someone who, again, I criticize Melo's tenure as a Knick a lot. I am pro him getting his number retired. I think when you think of this generation of Knicks basketball, by hook or crook, you think of Carmelo Anthony, and you do think of a lot of greatness that went with that. It wasn't necessarily a lot of wins, but a lot of points, a lot of memorable nights at Madison Square Garden. I think that he shouldn't get it before Bernard King. Bernard King absolutely needs to get his number retired, and it's a shame that he hasn't. Maybe whenever Julius Randle's Knicks career ends, and I'm not saying that it needs to end right now. I'm not trading him on this podcast. I'm just saying whenever Julius Randle moves on, and they have that 30 to retire, they should put up Bernard King. But I think that I'm fine with number 7 going up there in the Knicks rafters. I think that he deserves that. And I thought that he was classy, by the way, to come in and know that he couldn't wear 15, which is retired for Earl Monroe. So I always think it's a fun conversation with the retirements with Carmelo because he'd be the guy who probably won the least of these guys that would be up there.
Definitely.
And there are some other guys, guys played in the 90s, like the Celtics retired role players' numbers. Like, like John Starks' number is not retired. And some people may say, should he have been retired, considering how much winning they did in the 90s?
Or Oakley,
Or Charles Oakley, right, which over James Dolan's dead body would Charles Oakley's number be retired at Madison Square Garden.
The other thing is, what are they gonna do when Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle lead this Knicks team to a dynasty of like 4 titles in 5 years? Then do they have 2 number 30s retired? That's a whole nother predicament they'll be in in about 10 years from now.
Exactly. So shout out to the great Carmelo Anthony again. I saw him when he arrived at the Garden on Christmas, and he got a great standing ovation. I was one of them up cheering for him and giving him a standing ovation. So a crazy time that was in 2011 when Melo was traded to the New York Knicks. But that's going to do it for this edition of the Orange and Blue Bloods podcast. Tommy, let the people know where they can find you.
At Tommy Beer on Twitter.
You can find me, EJ_Stewart on Twitter, Action EJ on Instagram and TikTok. That'll do it for now. But I want you guys to keep checking us out on Orange and Blue Bloods and our Audacy Original, WFAN Original. You can catch all these episodes wherever you get your podcasts, including the free Audacy app. Make sure you get the auto download feature so you make sure you get these video episodes every time we drop. Also, be sure to check us out on YouTube on the Audacy Sports channel, where we also do our video segments as well as the full episode that gets put up there. So make sure you subscribe to the Audacy Sports channel on YouTube. That's going to do it for now. Thank you guys so much for checking us out. For Tommy, I'm EJ. Take it easy, guys. Peace.